Oh, there are 6 teams on a bye. It's a lot of tough choices for fantasy managers, but we have the easy choice for you. It's time for the easy choice presented by Geico. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard giving you starts and sits for week number 13. Dave, there's so much star power missing this week. It's going to be frustrating for fantasy managers, but that's why they're here, so we can help them out with those tough lineup decisions. Let's start with the start of the week for week 13, and this guy's been tough to trust for the majority of the year. Najee Harris was a third-round pick based on the CBS Sports average draft position, but he's going to deliver for you in week 13 against the Cardinals defense that's number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Najee's actually been playing better of late, 15.6 PPR points or more in 4 of his last 6 games, and the new offense in Pittsburgh looks like it's humming right now, and I think we'll see Najee continue to do some damage against the Cardinals. They've allowed a running back to score at least 12.7 PPR points in every game this season, and it won't be just Najee. I think we'll see Jalen Warren also get in on the fun. He's a top 20 running back. Najee's a top 15 guy. And as you see, Dave, we're all in agreement for the most part that he's going to have a productive week in week 13.
He's had at least 15 PPR points in 4 of his past 6 games. A lot of it's touchdown related. So I went back and I looked at how Arizona's been doing, allowing touchdowns to running backs, 12 on the season, 8 of them inside the 5, at least 1 touchdown on the ground to a running back inside the 5 in 3 of their last 4 games. They didn't allow a rushing touchdown inside the 5 last week, but they did allow a receiving touchdown inside the 5 last week. Very susceptible down there. That's where Najee gets his touchdowns. He should be good for at least 1 score and plenty of yards as well.
Yep, and we saw again both not only Kyron Williams last week for the Rams, but also Royce Freeman, which is why you can get 2 guys producing in this backfield. So Jalen Warren's a safe start as well. Let's show you some other starts for week 13 for me. Here's a list of guys we're looking at. A pair of Jaguars on this list, and Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley. I took the low-hanging fruit of Zach Moss. He's back now as a starter for the Colts. Cortland Sutton gets a little bit of a homecoming going back to face the Texans in Houston, and Josh Downs taking on the Titans defense that he beat up earlier this season in week number 5. Had 13 targets last week. Gardner Minshew should continue to lean on him. Some Colts, some Jaguars, and a Bronco. Let's talk about the Jaguars because Trevor Lawrence is on fire coming into this game against the Bengals on Monday night. 26 fantasy points or more, taking on a Bengals defense that's allowed 4 of the last 5 opposing quarterbacks to go for over 20 fantasy points. Trevor Lawrence is a top 5 quarterback for me. I'm expecting a big game from all of the Jaguars, which is why I also like Calvin Ridley. You know what Calvin Ridley likes, Dave? He likes Zay Jones. The 5 games that Zay Jones has played, he's finished 4 of them. In all 4, Calvin Ridley has scored 20 or more PPR points. I don't know what it is. We were talking about this on our podcast. Like, is it the routes that are run differently? Is it the coverage that's schemed differently? Is it Trevor Lawrence looking for him because Zay Jones different things? I don't care. Zay Jones plays, Calvin Ridley produces. That's what we're going to see against his Bengals defense. They give up a lot of big plays, second most big plays allowed in the NFL besides the Washington Commanders. And this is going to be another huge game for Calvin Ridley. I think I'm ranked too low at number 12. But Lawrence to Ridley, that's been sort of the key these last couple of weeks. Back-to-back good games for Lawrence, back-to-back good games for Ridley. First time all season that we've seen that. It will continue for 3 games in a row as the Jaguars offense finally getting on track. And then in terms of Zach Moss, like I said, I took the low-hanging fruit. We saw him last time they played the Titans, 33 PPR points. Now this Titans run defense has gotten a little bit better. They're starting to look like the Titans run defense we've seen. They're actually undefeated at home, so take that into account. But the Colts will lean on Zach Moss. Our colleague Heath Cummings has him ranked 2, so we're not that crazy. We only have him ranked consensus-wise number 5, but still a top 12 running back this week against the Titans. He's going to get all the work, and when he's had work this season, he's been successful. 4 of his first 6 games, 14.4 PPR points, but when we did not see Jonathan Taylor, it was almost consistently over 20 PPR points, and so that's the upside for Moss. So if you have him, you start him and expect good things. And like I said, Cortland Sutton, going back to the state that he's from, the area that he's from, I forget the name of the city that he grew up in. I apologize. It starts with a B. But it's halfway between Houston and Austin, and so I'm sure he's going to have a lot of family in town for this game. Last year he played the Texans in Denver. It was 7 catches for 122 yards. He scored a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games. He's the go-to guy for Russell Wilson. I think it's going to be a fun game between the Texans and the Broncos, and Cortland Sutton will be the best wide receiver for Denver, not the best wide receiver in this game. Thankfully, Tank Dell is healthy, practicing on Thursday. All right, Dave, let's take a look at some starts for you so I can stop talking. You like the quarterback that's throwing to Cortland Sutton. That's Russell Wilson. You also have Devin Singletary, Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice, and Evan Ingram. Tell me about Russell Wilson, who's been sort of up and down as a fantasy quarterback.
He's been up and down because he's not throwing a lot, Jamie. 18 or more fantasy points, however, in 3 of his past 4 games. Usually we like to talk about 20-plus fantasy points for a quarterback being good. But this week, 6 teams on bye, a lot of stud quarterbacks on bye. You will take 18 points from your fantasy passer. But the Texans, they've allowed at least 20 fantasy points to each of the last 4 quarterbacks that they've taken on. That includes Kyler Murray. That includes Baker Mayfield. Russell Wilson, at least as good of a passer with better efficiency than those quarterbacks. If you do the math, you take his season-long yards per attempt average, his touchdown rate over the course of the season, you apply it to the 34.8 pass attempts that quarterbacks are averaging against Houston this year, you're going to get 21 fantasy points from Russell Wilson without even considering any rushing numbers from him. So I think he's got a chance to jump over that 20-point hurdle. And Cortland Sutton is from Brenham, Texas.
That is right, yes. I'm picturing, by the way, when you're giving all that math, the hangover gif of,
That's
Zach
me.
Galifianakis, just kind of looking
at a blackjack table.
At a blackjack table, no less, where you like to certainly hang out more poker than blackjack, though. In that same game, you like Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary. Last week, we saw Dameon Pierce return from his 3-game absence with an ankle injury, but it did not matter.
Didn't get a lot of carries last week, but he still dominated the touches. He played 81% of the snaps, all but one of the third down snaps, all of their snaps inside the 5. This is your lead running back for Houston, not Dameon Pierce. And the Broncos have allowed at least 95 total yards to 7 of the last 10 running backs that they faced, 150 rush yards total to Minnesota's running backs in Week 11. So I don't know if I buy into that part of the Broncos defense being good. And I think the Texans ride Devin Singletary last week, especially after they gave him only 6 carries last week. Look for him to get maybe even the same type of target volume. That would be sweet. 7 targets, 6 catches last week. If he gets that and more carries, call it 13 carries, he's got a shot to finish close to a top 12 running back, even in half PPR leagues.
You got Marquise Brown as a start. I'm a little curious about this one because I'm concerned about this Cardinals passing attack, but you think that Marquise Brown will deliver. 2 of 3 games have been very underwhelming with Kyler Murray back.
And even the 3rd game, he was under 15 PPR points. I like him as a high-end flex. I just look at this matchup against Pittsburgh and I think to myself, Arizona's going to have to throw a lot. And I know the Steelers defense, they looked amazing against Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They looked amazing against Jake Browning. They looked great against Will Levis. But there's a game in between there. They played against Jordan Love, mobile quarterback, likes to throw downfield, has a strong arm. Yeah, they didn't look so amazing against him. And so I wonder if maybe it comes in garbage time, almost certainly in the second half. This is the main target getter. He had almost a 28% target share last week from Kyler Murray. I don't mind taking the chance on Marquise Brown. I prefer it in half and full PPR leagues compared to non-PPR leagues, but I think he can get you some decent numbers this week. Not quite a top 24 wide receiver, but not someone you should absolutely outright sit.
All right, I'm not very high on this Cardinals passing attack. As you take a look at the sits for me, I have Kyler Murray as a sit because I do buy into the Steelers' pass rush, making things very uncomfortable for Murray, who's gotten you by with his legs, and that certainly could still matter in this game. He has a rushing touchdown in 3 games in a row, but I'll tell you in a second why I really just don't like Kyler Murray based on the overall matchup. Joe Mixon, we'll just go with there right now. So Kyler Murray taking on this defense, I think what we're going to see is him struggle to take advantage of the secondary. Joey Porter did a great job last week on Jamar Chase. I think we'll take away Marquise Brown. Trey McBride's banged up right now. Michael Wilson not expected to play in this game. The receiving core is not going to help him. You mentioned it, Dave, that they're not going to have a lot of success running the ball. I think this is going to be a dominant game by the Steelers defense. I don't really trust anything for the Cardinals. We do get the revenge game narrative for James Conner. I don't think that matters either. Mike Tomlin already saying we're not going to let James Conner do what James Conner is capable of doing because he remembers how much success he had. But Kyler Murray, we know, if you take a look at Mike Tomlin's track record, look at Lamar Jackson, he eliminates running quarterbacks for the most part, and I think he will do the same thing in keeping Kyler Murray in check. Joe Mixon, we saw 1 game for him without Joe Burrow, and it was ugly. Jake Browning did not help this offense, and Mixon had 8 carries, 10 total touches, 2 catches for 44 yards, kind of saved him a little bit. They got to give him the ball more, but this Jacksonville defense has been good. Only 3 touchdowns to running backs on the ground, so I don't think Mixon finds the end zone. You go back to the beginning part of the season when Joe Burrow was struggling, dealing with that calf injury. Mixon's production was very troubling as well, and I think this Jacksonville defense will come to play, one of my favorite streaming options for this coming week. You see some receivers on this list as well. Drake London, Christian Watson. London gets to take on the Jets. No bueno for me. And then Christian Watson has been great the last 2 weeks, certainly last week's game against the Lions. That was a favorable matchup. Now he's probably going to see L'Jarius Sneed. I don't think that's going to be good for Christian Watson or Jordan Love, so I would try to stay away from him if you can. Again, that touchdown streak of 2 in a row will probably come to an end. Some sits for you, Dave. Again, sticking with the Cardinals here. You got James Conner on this list. Cooper Kupp is a big name that you're trying to avoid. Tyler Lockett in tonight's game. Deontay Johnson and Chris Godwin. Conner, again, there's some fun revenge games this week. Conner's one of them at Pittsburgh. You got Baker Mayfield taking on the Panthers. You got the big one between MVS and the Packers. So don't forget about that. So
I did forget about that.
Some fun revenge game narratives, but you're not buying the Connor one going back to Pittsburgh.
Well, first of all, I'm going to move Marquez Valdez-Scantling up to number 1 in my wide receiver rankings. Thank you very much for that, Jamie Eisenberg. 877, not a toll-free number. Those are the fantasy point totals in PPR for James Conner in each of 3 games with Kyler Murray. I do like that he started to get some more targets last week, and maybe that's what you have to count on with James Conner. But this is listen, I agree with you on the game script and how it'll go. I think the Steelers run away, pun intended, with the victory against the Cardinals. But I think Kyler Murray does get some decent numbers in here, and I don't think James Conner does well. This is the first time in his career, by the way, he's an enemy of Pittsburgh. Played his pro ball before Arizona in Pittsburgh, college ball at Pitt, high school in the area, and now he's back as an enemy. It's weird for him. Cooper Kupp. I'm encouraged that he's practicing in full this week, and I'm hoping that he looks better than he did last week, because last week it was short routes. He couldn't separate. He did not look like Cooper Kupp. Adam Azer said it on our podcast. He looked like Kyle Pitts from earlier this year. Sluggish and slow. That's not a type of wide receiver that you want, and he's taking on the Browns. You know they're going to play a lot of man-to-man coverage. I need to see Cooper Kupp look good before I fully trust him as a top 12 type of fantasy wide receiver, and he has 13 targets in his last 3 games. He left one of those games early, but still, we're used to seeing him get 13 targets.
One of those also with Stafford, too.
And actually, that might have been his best game. It was certainly the one where he had the most targets with 7 games.
Let me ask you this, though, because the Browns are dealing with several injuries. If there's no Myles Garrett, if there's no Denzel Ward, if there's no Thornhill, does that change things for you? Because that's a lot of bad stuff for the Rams and a lot of good stuff for the Browns missing if those guys aren't there.
So the one thing that I've always loved about the Browns defense this year is the depth that they have. So really, the only guy that matters, you don't replace Myles Garrett. They are expecting him to play, so I'm expecting him to play. That's going to be bad for Matthew Stafford and everybody else in that passing game.
All right, so we'll see what happens with Puka, with Kupp, with Stafford, as they're taking on maybe a depleted Browns defense, but hopefully your lineups are not depleted and you have everything you need to get through a very tough Week 13 with all the teams on a bye. For more fantasy football goodness and to help you navigate these tough waters, check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. Wherever podcasts are found, we're helping you dominate your fantasy leagues as the playoffs are rapidly approaching.